None of us can successfully face the future or make good decisions unless we are prepared. If we don't understand the tools that we need to prepare ourselves, we're going to be lost. Terry and I strongly feel that this book offers a wide range of tools and techniques, all of which have been tested in many different industries and many different environments, that allow the reader to make that journey into the future. I think the main story behind this new book, Two-Speed World, is about change and decision making. It started with a series of informal conversations with my co-author Terry Lloyd. Terry's from an engineering background and I'm from wholesale banking, and we found that through comparing stories and past experiences that we had seen similar sort of effects in both totally different areas. Also looking at other areas such as computing, there were again similar stories that came to the fore. Interestingly, you often find that bankers only talk to bankers, certainly not talking to engineers, and of course, as we all know, computer people don't talk to anyone. So taking these views from different industries and different sort of segments of life, we thought, well, there's some common themes that we could bring together when looking at change and sort of decision making and the future. And the idea is that the reader gets drawn into looking at various experiences in different areas and then seeing how that is really parallel probably to their own experience. I think the principal lesson we found was that, as the book title implies, change and the world in general runs at two speeds, by which we mean that there's a steady or incremental state, which is in fact often the normality in life. Things just sort of tick along in a sort of steady eddy fashion. And then of course there are disruptions, where we get the sudden explosion or unexpected event. And that in fact life is a complex mixture of those two different states. And it's important that we all understand which state we're in and how we should act or react if that state should change. A number of people have asked me about which is the best for us, steady progress or experiencing violent upheaval. Of course, upheaval needn't necessarily be a bad thing, but it's generally the case that people prefer steady progress. This can be characterised by the phrase established practice, that we're in a mode or an environment where things happen in a steady state. Equally, of course, we can have a violent move or a sudden explosion or a technological change, and that, if you like, can be pursuing novelty. Now, the really critical thing in this two-speed world is that in fact we have the ability to recognise both types of world and to be able to move smoothly from one to the other. We tend to have a comfort zone that is either one or the other, and in the majority of cases people feel most comfortable in the incremental world. The key lesson is we've got to recognise both worlds, and we've got to be able to smoothly transition between the two of them. It is common for us to think that year in, year out we'll be in the same incremental, steady world, but of course disruptions do come along. And that sort of poses the question, which is the most important to us? Just that steady incremental state or the big technological disruptive change? A really good example actually might be the development of the motor car, where we could pose the question, who's the most important in the history of the motor car? Carl Benz, who was the original inventor and builder of the first machine, or the whole host of engineers over the last 100 years who carefully innovated and refined the product? It's really a totally different skill to have made the first invention from then actually innovating and developing the motor car thereafter. Of course, in truth, both sets of people are equally important. We needed Mr. Benz to make the breakthrough, but we've needed all those engineers to refine and develop the product going forward. So there's a perfect example in engineering of where the two-speed world has been important at both speeds. I think one element that we should also consider is the relationship between the two speeds, between the incremental world and the disruptive world. There's a sort of tension in the relationship between those two speeds. Again, maybe as a good way to illustrate or explain this is to consider the history of the computer industry since the Second World War. Computers grew out of the early code-breaking machines from the Second World War, and then they developed into the sort of mainframe computing industry. So there was an initial disruption when the initial computers were developed during the war, and then incrementally in the post-war years they grew into larger and larger mainframe machines. However, there was a problem there in that the marketplace was not really looking for larger and larger code-breaking machines. We really wanted something more flexible and frankly smaller. along came a new disruption in the form of the mini-computer that actually swept away a large number of the existing players. The early players in the marketplace simply disappeared. In time, that second level of the industry also developed, and through incremental change got to a certain level before the third and probably most important disruption came in the marketplace, the personal computer. The personal computer was a disruptive game changer, and really that's now some 25 years ago, and we've seen a large number of incremental changes going forward. So that history actually demonstrates how we have this pattern of disruptive technological change followed by a tail of innovation, and then there's a market demand, or there's a new invention or a new idea that comes in and causes a new change, a new disruption, and we go round the cycle again. We mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that disruptive change is always bad news. In these two modes of change, we can think of incremental change as being the mode of change that ensures our survival. It's the day-to-day routine processes and ways that we organise our life and everything around us. Disruptive change is in fact what drives progress. So going back to our example in the computer industry, the disruptive change was bad news for the old-fashioned mainframe computer manufacturers who didn't change. But for the overall consumer and the marketplace, the new disruption of mini-computers in the late 60s and then the all-important personal computer in the early 1980s was very good news overall for the marketplace. So to reiterate, just because it's a disruption, it isn't always bad news. Incremental change ensures our survival. Disruptive change drives progress. Let's think of this whole idea of the disruptive world and the incremental world with three other labels, and we'll call those messes, problems and puzzles. All the issues that we face, whether it's individuals or organisations, fit into one of those three categories. And we can put a little bit of definition on those by, for example, saying a mess is really an issue that is made up of completely potential disruptive changes and a disruptive environment. Problems are actually sitting in the incremental world, but they do have disruptive elements to them. And the final category, puzzles, is really just a description of the incremental world. So now that we've got those three definitions, we can then work further to look at the different tools we can use to tackle those different types of issue. This book is not intended as a recipe book for techniques for change and decision making. Our approach to it has been to develop an overview of all the classical techniques that have really been in use, certainly since the second half of the 20th century, regarding change and decision making. The book sets out to look at all the classical techniques and, really importantly, to look at their relevance when we're looking at the whole range of issues we face in the two-speed world. Of course, we face a multiple range of different issues and situations. It may be an issue that has a single solution, there may be multiple solutions. The facts may be very hard and quantitative and easy to find, or they may be quite soft and qualitative and much more judgmental. In this book, we look at all the techniques and we marry them up against each individual type of issue and situation, and then look at their appropriateness. If you like, horses for courses. A lot of these techniques are not that new. In fact, a lot of them are based in early decision theory and futures planning from the Second World War. Obviously, since that time, over the last 50 or 60 years, they have been developed and refined quite a lot, and a lot of important and clever thinking has gone into how to use these tools. The reader shouldn't be put off by the idea that there may be old ideas. In fact, these ideas are very relevant and modern to today's issues that we face, because in fact the issues we face, in a strange sort of way, are age-old. It's always a problem of how to make the decision and how to assess the future. We don't set out in this book to try and solve the world's problems. What we're really trying to do is provide the reader with the full landscape of the decision tools that they can use when making decisions about the future and change. It's really about preparedness. We can't do anything in the future unless we're prepared in some way or another. The issues we face actually drop down into a surprisingly few number of categories, and by looking at that full range of tools And by understanding those categories, we are convinced that the reader will have a much better understanding of how to look at future planning and ensuring their own preparedness, whether as individuals or as an organisation.